And C. Wright says, the critical believer, the one who is fair-minded, has more in common with the critical believer in a different system. So a critical Christian would have more in common with a critical Muslim than they would have in common with a sophistic or vulgar believer in the system that they believe in. Now, how many of us have taken that challenge up and have developed as critical believers in whatever we believe in? If so, we're ready to admit that we're wrong. We're ready to learn and grow. We're ready to step outside the box and bring more into the box. We're ready to transform our lives progressively as we live and grow as a thoughtful creature on the planet. Now, let me take on the voice of the critical teacher, the voice of the person who has been teaching for critical thinking and is committed to their teaching. As a teacher, I face a challenge. I recognize that my students have some insights and have learned some things, but that most of them are undisciplined learners. I recognize that my students are not on the whole good readers. They're not on the whole good writers. They're not on the whole good speakers. They're not on the whole aware of the basic structures out of which thought is constructed. They don't understand the intellectual standards. They have no intellectual standards. They do not like intellectual work. They have egos, as do I, but they indulge in their ego. They do not like to be uncomfortable. And so my challenge as a teacher, and I accept that challenge, is to create a process in the classroom in which the students cannot avoid learning how to write a little better, read a little better, hear a little better, speak a little better, read, write, and speak within content areas. So I want them to be good biological thinkers in their biology classes. I want them to be good historical thinkers in their history class. And if I'm teaching that class, it's my responsibility to bring that mode of thinking into the foreground in the most simple form that I can. For example, at the essence of history is a concern with the past and the relationship of the past to the present, and the relationship of the past and the present to possible futures. And so I study the past and think about the past in order to learn about the present and to understand the present in a richer way. So if you are my student and we're in a history class, you are going to use your historical thinking to discover the relevance of history for your own personal growth. What can we learn from history, from the past, is a question that we'll continually be asking. What can we learn from the Middle Ages? What can we learn from the intolerance of dominant religious groups, where the group in power treated the group out of power as heretics and punished them with execution if they refused to accept the view of the dominant religious group? What can we learn from those Middle Ages? And to what extent have we grown beyond them? And to what extent are we still reflecting the intolerance which was taken to be religious insight? So that when the Catholics were persecuting the Protestants, the Catholics felt that they were doing something good for them, because after all, if you didn't accept the true religion, you would suffer for all eternity in hell. And therefore, better that you suffer torture now than to suffer for all eternity because you refuse to accept the right belief. This kind of self-righteousness was common not only for those who defended Catholicism, but for those who attacked Catholicism. And both of them, whether Christian or whether Protestant or Catholic, agreed that the Muslims were completely wrong. And that the Muslims, once they were acquainted with the teachings of Christ, had to accept those teachings or they would suffer for all eternity in hell. Now, to what extent have we gotten off that mode of thinking, where we're intolerant toward other people who believe differently than we do? Think of the most intolerant Muslims. What are they doing? They're blowing up themselves, blowing up many innocent people in defense of their religion. And what are uncritical, intolerant Jews doing in the state of Israel to the Palestinians? Are they accepting the Palestinians as equal citizens in their own land? Or are they rather reducing them to something less than the fully human level by the policies? But of course, if you look amongst Jews, there will be vulgar believers, sophistic believers, and critical believers. And so what we need is a dialogue between critical Jews, critical Muslims, and critical Christians, so that we can work together to treat everyone as equally human and equally dignified, and thereby solve the problem of the Middle East. But as long as the problem is defined in terms of force and coercion, the problem cannot be solved.